This is international news on Atlantic Television Network. First, the headlines. Israel military says Hamas uses civilians as human shields.
80 detained after airport anti-Israeli riot in Dagestan.
Isle of Man to legalize assisted dying.
Pentagon to send further 300 troops to Middle East.
Hawaiian couple convicted for identity theft of dead babies.
Bullied with Israel for war crimes.
Said it ended its presence in Kidal in a hurry after its last convoy of peacekeepers suffered 2 IED attacks on the way to another key town in the north. The terror coalition claimed victory on social media, saying it was in control of the Tit Bits. First, that the rebel occupied the camp immediately after it was vacated by the U.S. It was the third and last camp to be evacuated by the mission in Kidal region, which has been hit by jihadist and separatist violence. The other 2 camps were Tessalit and Aguel Hawk. The separatist groups, which had earlier agreed to a ceasefire with authorities, had recently resumed hostilities in the area. They opposed peacekeepers handing over their camps to the Malian army. Mali's military government has demanded that the UN force leave the country by the end of the year, saying its decade-long mission against Islamic militants had failed.
A Ugandan court has ordered a U.S. couple charged with torturing the foster child to pay him $26,000 as compensation. The compensation resulted from a plea deal which also led to the court dropping the charges of aggravated trafficking and torture against the couple, which could have seen them receive life imprisonment. Nicholas and Mackenzie Spencer were arrested last year and charged with over 2 years. This is after the child's nanny filed a police report alleging that the couple repeatedly subjected the child to inhumane treatment. On Tuesday, they pleaded guilty to the charges of cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment, working without permits, and staying in Uganda unlawfully, for which they were fined 4.86 million Ugandan shillings. But the Tuesday ruling has angered child rights activists who termed it a mockery of justice. Activists Proscovia Najumba questioned how the court allowed the couple to walk away after accepting they mistreated a child, the press reported. Court documents showed that the couple served the child cold food, made him sleep on a bare wooden platform without bedding, and to squat in an awkward position.
The United States says it will reinstate Mauritania's Opportunity Act program following an eligibility review. The reinstatement will be done in January next year after substantial and measurable progress on workers' rights and eliminating forced labor, the U.S. Trade Office says. The trade benefits were suspended in 2019 following concerns over workers' rights violation in Mauritania. Mauritania's reinstatement follows U.S. President Joe Biden's announcement on Tuesday to terminate the agro leaves for Gabon, Niger, Uganda, and the Central African Republic. The U.S. says Gabon and Niger agro's eligibility were terminated because of unconstitutional government changes after coups, while Uganda's and CAR's benefits were terminated based on human rights violations perpetrated by those governments. Burkina Faso, Mali, and expelled from Agua after military coups in those countries. Mauritania's economy is dominated by extractive industries, mainly oil and 3/4 of exports. Fisheries, animal and plant farming also contribute a huge percentage to the government's revenue. The program, introduced in 2000, gives eligible sub-Saharan African countries duty-free access to the U.S. for more than 1,800 products.
Jordan's foreign ministry has condemned Israel's airstrike on a refugee camp, saying the attack contradicts human and moral values as well as international humanitarian law. Here is the statement from Jordan's foreign ministry posted on X, formerly known as Twitter. Jordan's foreign ministry condemns in the strongest terms the Israeli aggression that targeted the Jabalia camp in the Gaza Strip this evening, holding Israel, the occupying power, responsible for this dangerous development. The Jordanian foreign ministry affirmed the kingdom's strong rejection and condemnation of this act, which contradicts all human and moral values and the rules of international humanity.
In Gaza went to Egypt to receive treatments, the General Authority for Crossing Border in Gaza said. Egyptian authorities confirmed to Gazan authorities that 81 severely wounded people will be allowed to enter the country, press reported. The figure comes after Egyptian medical and security sources said that the Rafah boarding crossing would be open for a number of injured Palestinians completing treatments in Egyptian hospitals, press reported earlier.
Hamas says it would release some foreign hostages soon. Hamas armed wing said on Tuesday that it would release a number of the foreign hostages in its captivity in the next few days. The Israeli military has raised the number of, it says, being held in Gaza by Hamas to 240. Hamas has so far released 4 hostages back to Israel. The head of Israel's national that he does not see a deal for the release of hostages being closed. Zachi had said that the day after the war is not closed.
2 French children have been killed in the north of the Gaza Strip, France's foreign ministry said on Tuesday. The ministry said the children's mother was thought to be suffering from injuries along with a third child, press reported. It reiterated its call for a humanitarian pause in the fighting and demanded that French nationals and foreign citizens to be allowed to leave Gaza.
Palestinian women are being forced to give birth without anesthesia, undergoing cesareans whilst awake and without painkillers amidst intense bombardment of the Gaza Strip. An international charity has warned. It said it was very concerned about a lack of clean water contributing to a rise in sickness and a lack of hygiene alongside a serious deterioration in living conditions across the Palestinian. To aid is stricken into Gaza will barely touch the sites of the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Gaza, it said. For hospitals and others particularly precarious, with Al-Quds and Al-Shifa hospitals not receiving any aid supplies at all due to ongoing hostilities. The chaos and horror unleashed in Gaza is affecting women in devastating ways. Suraida Hussein Sabad, a gender and advocacy specialist based in Ramallah, Action Aid said, "Every day we hear of doctors delivering the babies of women who are dying."
People at a refugee camp in northern Gaza on the 25th day of a conflict that the United Nations said has become a graveyard for children. At least 6 airstrikes hit residential areas in the camp on Gaza City's outskirts on Tuesday, killing more than 50 people and injuring about 150, said. Video footage showed at least 47 bodies pulled out of the rubble and rescue teams searching for survivors amid twisted metal and huge craters. The Hamas-run health ministry called the attack a heinous massacre. The Israeli military said it has targeted the camp to kill Ibrahim Bairi, a key Hamas commander linked to the group's 7th October attack on Israel, who it said had taken over civilian buildings in Gaza City with his fighters. When asked if the Israeli there were civilians in Jabalia, a spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht, said Israel had attempted to minimize civilian casualties in a complex operation. This is the tragedy of war. We've been saying for days, move south. Civilians that are not involved with Hamas. Manage came amid fierce clashes between Israeli troops and Hamas militants, and dire warnings from aid agencies of faltering aid efforts and atrocious conditions for civilians. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reiterated his call for an immediate immediate ceasefire and urged all sides to respect law. Condemned the killing of civilians in Gaza, and I am dismayed at reports that two-thirds of those who have been killed are women and children. Bombardments have killed at least 8,525 Palestinians, including 3,542 children. According to Hamas Health Ministry, figures issued before the strikes on Jabalia. The numbers are appalling, said a U.S. UNICEF spokesperson, James Elder. Gaza has become a graveyard for thousands of children. It is a living hell for everyone else. Without a ceasefire and greater humanitarian access into the Gaza Strip, we hurtle towards even greater horrors afflicting.
Israel spokesperson Daniel Hagari said Hamas has continued to use the civilian population in Gaza as human shields in a very cruel and brutal manner. Accused Hamas of intentionally building infrastructure beneath the people's homes. Top Hamas commander Ibrahim Biari is behind the massacre, not just of Israeli citizens on October 7th, but also the massacres that is loading to the collapse of the Gaza Strip on its inhabitants, he said. Therefore, we call upon the residents of northern Gaza to move south, and we will allow them to do so in corridors. Israel's military will continue to operate in full force in Gaza, he added.
For more than a decade, there have been calls for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to resign, and for a sort of reasons. Growing levels of inequality, his penchant for ugly populism, multiple corruption scandals, where he is still on trial, and most recently attempts at a overhaul. But after the Hamas, the future of Israel's political life is especially shaky, even in the midst of a new war in Gaza. It's alongside his minister and opposition leader, now part of the Emergency One cabinet, and their first press conference on Saturday night, a lackluster affair during which he appeared unfocused, stumbled over the words of a prayer, and then left early after facing hostile questions from reporters. He then took to X, a social media platform formerly known as Twitter, just after 1 a.m. to post a petulant message piling the blame for 7th October security and intelligence failures on the Israel Defense Forces. Contrary to the lying claims, under no circumstances and on no stage was Prime Minister Netanyahu warned about Hamas' intention to go to war, it read. Every defense official, including the heads of military intelligence, believed Hamas was deterred and sought accommodations. This was the assessment that was presented time and time again to the Prime Minister and the intelligence community up to the outbreak of war. This claim was not strictly true, and Netanyahu's attempt to throw his generals on furious public backlash. The next day, he or someone in his office deleted the tweet and issued an apology for posting it, rather than for the content itself. It was not lost on anyone that the post was the only thing Netanyahu has apologized for. In the 3 days, Israel woke up to its most serious crisis in 50 years. Noam Tibon, a 62-year-old retired general who took up arms to rescue his son's family from a kibbutz from a Netanyahu, resigned, telling Israel's Channel 12, the people need to feel security. They need to be sure that we are going to be victorious. I don't think he can lead us to victory. Yossi Cohen, a former Mossad chief, seen as Netanyahu's ally. Responsibility comes when you begin the job, not during it. The left-leaning Daily Herald, in a scathing piece published on Monday, said the two lowest points on the planet and in Israel, the Dead Sea, and his demeanor. One is a natural wonder, the other is a political blunder. Members of his party, in which they suggested that Netanyahu may finally be at the end of the political rope. A lack of support for the approximately 120,000 people displaced by the war and perceived indifference towards the families of the estimated 240 hostages seized by Hamas have also fed Israel public anger. Saturday's press conference was called to address Netanyahu's plummeting poll numbers. His performance and the outcry over the late-night tweets have probably accelerated rather than elevated downward trajectory. 76% of the Israeli public is dissatisfied with the government's performance in the aftermath of Hamas' attack. A poll conducted by Richmond University Institute for Liberty and Responsibility. Netanyahu himself, which was already declining, has fallen to an overall grade of 3.9 out of 10. While it is unlikely Netanyahu would ever step down willingly on Monday about whether he would resign, and a general election lost him, paving the way for a more centrist coalition. Such a move would have profound implications on how Israel continues to wage its new war in Gaza and scenario planning for what happens to the Gaza Strip the day after.
Israel's ground invasion of the northern Gaza Strip began on Friday evening, an urban warfare operation that is likely to be lengthy, fraught with danger for its military and Palestinian civilians, and whose ultimate goals remain uncertain. It began more than 3 weeks after Hamas' surprising and brutal cross-border attack of 7th October, in which 1,400 Israelis were killed, amid what the monitoring group Airways says is an aerial bombardment that far outpaces the number of bombs dropped in the deadliest months against the Islamic State. Israeli forces have already fired more than 8,000 munitions in Gaza, according to the country's military, in an attempt to soften up Hamas' resistance, but which has also led to thousands of casualties, including dozens at the Jabalia camp in the north of the Strip that was hit on Tuesday. Video and pictures released by the Israel Defense Force on Tuesday shows soldiers and tanks entering a shattered urban terrain, with the Israeli military and Hamas describing fighting fierce battles, although these are likely to be the only initial skirmishes for strategic position. Verifiable information is hard to come by, but the limited evidence emerging from the combat zone suggests that the IDF is seeking to encircle Gaza City, probably as a prelude to trying was the capital of the Strip. Tanks were filmed having advanced to cut the main north-south Salah al-Din road south of Gaza City on Monday. Suggested the road had reopened potentially in theory, making it easier for the attackers. If the initial plan is to seize Gaza City in the north, which the idea believes is at the heart of Hamas' operation, the fighting is likely to remain in a congested urban setting where civilian and Hamas military objects are frequently located side by side or intertwined. The destruction of urban areas will be almost unavoidable. A study in the Washington Institute for Near East Policy observed that during the Battle of Raqqa, recaptured from ISIS in East Syria 2017, 80% of buildings were destroyed in 90 days of fighting. At least in that battle, significantly fewer than the 8,000 Palestinians declared dead by Gaza's health ministry in the fighting so far. A more significant
with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other Israeli officials, press reported. Barack said Secretary of State Blinken will arrive in Israel on Friday and meet Prime Minister Netanyahu and other Israeli officials.
Yemen's Iran-backed Houthis said they have launched a large number of ballistic missiles and drones towards Israel. The group's military spokesperson Yahya Sari said in a televised statement on Tuesday that his operation is a third targeting Israel, with no more to come. You're watching the International News on Atlantic Television Network. We'll be back after this break.
back. This is International News on Atlantic Television Network. Now the rest of our stories. U.S. imposed sanctions on country's oil gas firm. The United States imposed sanctions on Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise on Tuesday, the first time it has directly targeted the entity that is Myanmar's ruling junta's main source of foreign revenue. The action prohibits certain financial services by Americans to the state oil and gas enterprise starting on 15 December, the Treasury Department said in a statement. Financial services include loans, accounts, insurance, investment, and other services, according to Treasury guidance. The move represents the U.S. first direct action against the state-owned enterprise. Washington has previously targeted its leadership. The oil and gas industry is the biggest source of foreign currency revenue to Myanmar's murderous junta, bringing in 1.7 billion naira, $7 billion in the 6 months of 31st March 2022 alone, according to the junta's figures. Junta-controlled MOG acts as the primary gatekeeper to the country's oil and gas assets. Since the coup in February 2021, more than 4,162 people have been killed in the junta and pro-military groups, and 25,363 have been arrested, according to Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, the United Nations Special Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity daily. Some of the wars from operations that have helped prop up the military regime, according to a joint investigation of documents obtained by distributed denial of secrets and analyzed by press. The Myanmar activist group Justice for Myanmar and investigative journalism organization Finance uncovered. While the new sanctions will complicate business dealings with MOG, Washington held back from adding the enterprise to the specially designated national list, which would effectively kick it out of the U.S. banking system, ban in trade with Americans, and freeze its U.S. assets. The U.S. Financial Services Directive against MOG is a welcome step to disrupt the significant flow of funds to the junta from the oil and gas sector, said Yadna Mong, Justice for Myanmar spokesperson. The U.S. should continue to target the junta's sources of revenues and arms, including through full sanctions of MOG that would also target the U.S. corporations that have been supporting the maintenance and expansion of the very gas fields that finance atrocities. Washington also slapped sanctions on the 3 entities and 5 people who the U.S. Treasury Department said were connected to Myanmar's military, according to the statement in action coordinated.
Russia has detained more than 80 people in connection with the anti-Semitic rioting on Sunday, in which hundreds of young men stormed an international airport in Dagestan to stop Jews from disembarking from a flight from Tel Aviv.
Michelangelo Buonarroti left behind a trail of artistic marvel, including his statue, David, and the sublime frescoes that adorn the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Now a secret room in Florence whose walls are sketched with doodles that have Italian Renaissance masters believed to have created with while evading a death sentence ordered by Pope Clement amid his falling out with the powerful Medici family, is to officially open to the public for the first time. Michelangelo is thought to have spent about 2 months hiding in a tiny chamber beneath the Medici chapels in the Basilica of San Lorenzo in 1530, making dozens of drawings that are reminiscent of his previous works, including a drawing of Leda and the Swan, a painting produced during the same year that was later lost. The existence of the charcoal and chalk drawings remained unknown until 1975, when Paolo Del Paghetto, then the director of Medici Chapel, one of the 5 museums that make up the Bargello Museums, was searching for a suitable space to create a new exit for the museum. He found a trapdoor underneath a wardrobe that led to the 10-meter-long, 3-meter-wide room. The sketches were unveiled after the walls of the chamber, which until 1955 had been used to store black coal before being sealed off for the next 2 decades, were stripped. Paolo D'Agostino, the director of the Bargello Museum, said it was as if the artist had wanted to produce a catalogue of his works, not knowing whether he would emerge from the chamber dead or alive. He drew things from the past as if he was taking a trip down memory lane. It was like having an album of his works. D'Agostino said as she accompanied journalists on a visit to the room on Tuesday, other drawings recall some of the nude figures Michelangelo painted on the Sistine Chapel, and one is similar to his David statue. Others reflect the figures adorning the Medici family tomb created by Michelangelo and located at the new sacristy above the chamber.
Rishi Sunak held calls with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the President of the Palestinian Authority Mahmoud Abbas today. The UK Prime Minister told his Israeli counterpart of the importance of taking all possible measures to minimize civilian casualties. Ten said in a statement. The Prime Minister stressed the importance of rapidly increasing the flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza and welcomed Israel's commitment to facilitate significantly more deliveries. He said the UK would support all efforts to ensure life-saving aid reaches those in need, including temporary humanitarian pauses. Sunak also reiterated Britain's resolute backing for Israel's rights to defend itself against terrorism during the call, it said. The leaders also discussed the situation in the West Bank and the long-term goal of a two-state solution. It said the Prime Minister noted the importance of all sides avoiding actions that would inflame tensions and keeping hope alive for a more secure and prosperous future for both Israelis and Palestinians. In a statement after Sunak call with Abbas, Downing Street said the pair discussed the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza and that Sunak expressed his deep condolences for the tragic loss of civilian life during the call with the PA president. Sunak told Abbas that the UK would continue to support diplomatic action to protect Palestinian civilians, prevent wider escalation and secure a peaceful and lasting resolution to the crisis, it said.
5 men from Rochdale have been sentenced to between 8 and 20 years in prison after being found guilty of grooming and abusing 2 girls between 2004 and 2006. The longest sentence was given to the oldest defendant, Jan Shahid Ghani, a 50-year-old care worker. He was at least 30 when he took advantage of the girls when they were 14 or 15. He would pick them up from school while they were still in uniform and ply them with drink and drug them before exploiting them. He forced one of them, girl A, to have group sex when she was 14, once with a male colleague from work and also with his adult girlfriends. Minshaw Street Crown Court in Manchester heard. Girl A said she had thought she was in love with Ghani and that he was one of her best friends. He in turn told the jury he believed she and her friend, the second complainant, girl B, were 16. They were in separate consensual friends with benefits type sexual relationships with him, he claimed. It was at Ghani's flat above a butcher's shop in Rochdale that girl A was passed around like a piece of meat between Ghani's younger half-brother, Mohammed Faisal Ghani, and his friends. She said she was trapped like a prisoner in the flat and forced to have sex with numerous men on a stained single mattress with no sheets. The jury heard that Mohammed Ghani, a sweet talker, told her he would love her even more if she had sex with his friends. The court heard that on one occasion he persuaded girl A to have sex with his cousin, a man in his 30s who was visiting from Pakistan. He's never had sex with a white girl before, he told her, urging her to do it for the team. He then asked her to marry the cousin for £5,000 so that he could get a UK visa, but she refused. Hussein was sentenced to years for 1 count of rape and 2 counts of sexual activity with a child. The court heard that Mohammed Ghani, was now 39, was the first man to abuse girl A from the age of 14, having met her and invited her for drinks and drugs sesh when she was just 12. Sentencing the men, Judge Landale described the girls as immature and naive children who were loved by their mothers. They both wanted to be grown up and they wanted to be loved. As children, they believed they had street credibility, but in reality, that was fake. Each girl was a child ripe for exploitation by unscrupulous older men. Kazmi was the youngest defendant, aged 15 or 16, when he first abused girl B, who was reported missing from home by her mother at least 83 times as a teenager. He denied knowing both girls, only to be confronted with a video of himself attending the Islamic wedding of girl A. He was given an 8-year sentence, partly on account his age at the time of the abuse. Martin Rhodes, 39, a long-term heroin addict, was the only defendant to plead guilty to any of the charges against him and was sentenced to 1 year and 6 months for sexual activity with a child. The court heard that both complainants had believed he was their boyfriend when they were 14 and he was 20 or 21. He initially denied knowing either girl, only for police to point out that he had a tattoo with one of their names on his arm. Gandhi was sentenced to 20 years for 6 counts of sexual activities with a child and 1 count of causing a child to engage in sexual activity. Mohammed Ghani was sentenced to 14 for 5 counts of sexual activity with a child.
The Isle of Man has moved a step closer to legalizing assisted dying after its parliament backed a proposal to allow terminally ill, mentally competent adults to choose an assisted death. The House of Keys voted through a bill setting the self-governing UK crown dependency on a path to becoming the first part of Britain and Ireland to legalize assisted dying, subject to safeguards. It is estimated that between 2 and 40 people would use the law annually. It would also allow a person to request a doctor to administer a lethal injection known as euthanasia. But the Isle of Man is unlikely to become like Switzerland, the destination for at least 540 Britons to access legal assisted dying. If it becomes law, assisted dying in the Isle of Man will only be for people expected to die within 6 months who have been resident for at least a year. Some members of the Isle of Man Parliament nevertheless raised concerns that people from the mainland would move there to make use of the legislation, placing unsustainable strain on the local health system. The bill has further stages to go through before it is enacted, but the vote in favor of the second reading, 17-7, was welcomed by Right to Die campaigners as a historic step. The campaign group Dignity in Dying said it was a turning point in the movement for assisted dying that the Westminster government should heed. Trevor Moore, the chair of the My Death, My Decision campaign, also said the Isle of Man was on the way to giving mentally competent adults who are incurably suffering the choice of a dignified death. But the anti-assisted dying campaign groups Care Not Kill and branded it a dangerous and ideologically policy and claimed by allowing the deliberate ending of human life with death row drugs, many vulnerable people will feel pressured into ending their lives. Unlike in Canada, parts of the US, the Netherlands, most of Australia, New Zealand, Luxembourg, Colombia, Switzerland, Austria, Spain, and Portugal, assisted dying remains illegal in the UK. Polling from The Guardian in August found 65% of people in the UK believe it should become legal for a doctor to assist an adult of sound mind with less than 6 months to leave to voluntarily end their own life, subject to high court confirmation. The plan is the Isle of Man is to not involved in the courts. In an often emotional 5-hour debate, the Isle of Man Parliament had how loved ones of people who died painful deaths, suffer nightmares and panic attacks, thinking back and remembering the pain and the suffering loved ones went through. More than 3,000 people responded to a public consultations. Comments ranged from as a Christian, I feel it is murder, to mom's death was awful. I don't want to have to suffer in the same way.
Nicola Sturgeon has refused confirm or deny allegations that she deleted some or all of her WhatsApp messages during the COVID pandemic after questions emerged from the UK COVID inquiry whether the former Scottish First Minister had kept all her WhatsApp messages. There were reports at the weekend that they had all been deleted. The inquiry's Scottish counsel, Jamie Dawson Casey, stated that WhatsApp messages from ministers and officials, including senior public health officers, some of whom were involved in 137 WhatsApp groups, had not been disclosed despite repeated requests. Very few messages have been retained, he said, potentially in a breach of request to retain the records and legal orders to keep which were issued later. In a first public statement about the allegations, Sturgeon insisted she was committed to full transparency about her conduct during the pandemic, adding, I have nothing to hide. Yet, flanked by her former deputy John Sweeney, she was asked 4 times by reporters at Holyrood Whether she had kept or deleted her WhatsApp messages on each occasion refused to say. On Monday, Humza Yousaf, her successor at First Ministry, said publicly he had kept all of his WhatsApp messages and was providing them to the UK inquiry, adding to the pressure on Sturgeon. She stated on Tuesday she followed all the necessary rules and was in the process writing her third statement to the inquiry. She would be in breach of her obligations of confidentiality to the inquiry. She disclosed what that evidence said. She added, I will be very clear to inquiry what I hold and what I don't hold and why that is this case. But let me say again, I wasn't a member of any WhatsApp groups, she said. I didn't manage the COVID response by WhatsApp. The uncertainties over Sturgeon's handling of her messages will be central to the evidence she is expected to give to the UK inquiry early next year. In May 2020, Boris Johnson, the then Prime Minister, pledged there would be a public inquiry. In May 2021, UK COVID inquiry was formally confirmed. Lawyers for the COVID bereaved believed they should have triggered a law data retention rule for ministers. In August 2021, Sturgeon promised all WhatsApp messages will be kept for future Scottish public inquiry. November 2021, the UK inquiry issued its first do not destroy instructions. In June 2021 and again in February and October 2022, the UN government wrote to all devolved governments asking for all data to be retained. Cummings apologized for his language towards McNamara, who appears before the inquiry on Wednesday, saying it was obviously appalling but denied that it was misogynistic because he was much ruder about men. He added, 1,000 times worse than my language was the underlying insanity of the situation in number 10. In his final WhatsApp message to his former closest aide on 15 November 2020, Johnson described the infighting surrounding Cummings' departure from Downing Street 2 days earlier as disgusting orgy of narcissism. The government's handling of the pandemic continues to hang over Downing Street, even though it is more than a year since Johnson left number 10, with the former Prime Minister joining Rishi Sunak and other senior figures to give evidence before Christmas. However, the press revealed last month that Sunak has failed to hand over his own WhatsApp messages from his time as a Chancellor to the COVID inquiry, despite the High Court's ruling that ministers should disclose their communications for scrutiny. Cummings told the inquiry how the dysfunctional system, during a meltdown of the British state, had failed to deal with the crisis, while Kane, who served as number 10's communications director, criticized Johnson's tendency to oscillate between decisions for slowing down the government's response.
Keir Starmer has urged Israel to obey international law but refused to back calls for a ceasefire as he seeks to heal increasingly bitter divisions within his own party over the conflict in Gaza. The Labour leader spelled out his position on the crisis in detail on Tuesday after days of criticism from many of his own members and MPs that he appeared oblivious to the suffering of Palestinians. In an attempt to assure MPs and councillors who have threatened to quit the party over the issue, Starmer gave his most direct criticism yet of the Israeli bombardment, expressing concern over some of its actions and urging the Israeli government to allow fuel to cross into Gaza. But he rejected calls made by some of his most high-profile colleagues for an immediate ceasefire in the region, saying such a move would make it harder to rescue Israeli hostages still being held by Hamas. While I understand calls for a ceasefire at this stage, I do not believe that it is the correct position now, he told an audience at the Chatham House Foreign Affairs think tank in London. He said a ceasefire would freeze the conflict, allowing Hamas to launch attacks against Israel again in the future. Hamas would be emboldened and start preparing for future violence immediately, he said, adding that he wanted instead to see a temporary humanitarian pause in fighting. The comments were a direct rejection of calls for a ceasefire made by, among others, the Scottish Labour leader Anas Sawar, the Labour mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and the Labour mayor of Greater Manchester and the Bonham. At least 13 shadow ministers, including Alex Cunningham, Afzal Khan, Rushanara Ali, and the Slaughter, Jess Phillips and Florence Eshalomi have also joined calls for an end to the fighting. Starmer also refused to support the judgment of the UN, among others, that war crimes may have been committed during the bombardment of Gaza. Israel has to act in accordance with the law, he said. But he added, I think it's unwise for politicians to stand on stages like this or to sit in television studios and pronounce day by day which acts may or may not be lawful under international law. His comments were criticized by Sacha Deshmukh, the chief executive of Amnesty International UK, who said, in failing to call for an immediate ceasefire, Keir Starmer is not showing the clear and principled leadership that this decades-old crisis needs. He said it was deeply disappointing that Starmer did not use the moment to be clear that under his leadership the UK would be consistent and rigorous in supporting international law. The Labour leader did go further than he had recently in his criticism of Israel's actions since the Hamas October attack. Starmer said that the recent 36-hour communications blackout that led to people in Gaza being unable to call for an ambulance after being hit by rocket attack was a concern. He said those who had been forced to flee their homes should receive crystal clear guarantees that they will be able to return. He called it unacceptable that the siege conditions around Gaza had not been filled but been lifted, and he urged Israel to allow fuel into the Strip, something Israel is refusing to do, instead accusing Hamas hoarding supplies. As Starmer left the venue of his speech, his vehicle was surrounded by protesters who demanded an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Police officers pushed them aside, but the protesters ran at the car and drummed on the windows. Since the war broke out earlier this month, Starmer has struggled to maintain discipline within his party over the issue. Tension started after Starmer gave an interview with LBC during the Labour Party conference in which he appeared to suggest Israel was justified in cutting off electricity and water to Gaza. Since then, multiple members of the shadow cabinet have urged him to show more compassion to the suffering of ordinary Palestinians. Several Labour councillors have quit the party in protest, and the party's most well-known devolved leaders have broken ranks to call for a ceasefire. On Monday, the Labour MP and MacDonald was suspended by the party for using the phrase "between the river and the sea" during a pro-Palestinian protest, a phrase that some see as calling for the destruction of Israel. Starmer on Tuesday refused to comment on MacDonald's case, but urged MPs to be extremely careful about the language that we use. So far, the Labour leader has shielded away from punishing shadow cabinet ministers who have called for a ceasefire despite that not being the official party position. He insisted on Tuesday that the shadow cabinet was still bound by collective responsibility, but he added that he would not necessarily take a hard line against those who breached it on this issue. It's my job to ensure we do have collective responsibility, he said. I will do it sensitively and engaging with my front benches.
The U.S. Senate has confirmed former Treasury Secretary Jack Lew as the new U.S. ambassador to Israel. Lew was approved 53 to 43, with two Republicans, Rand Paul and Kentucky, and Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, breaking rank to back him.
The U.S. has announced it will send a further 300 troops to the Middle East to support those already deployed in the region. Pentagon spokesperson Brigadier Patrick Ryder said on Tuesday, these additional troops will provide capabilities and explosive ordnance disposal, communications, and other support enablers for force already in the region. He did not specify where in the Middle East the additional troops will be, but said they would not go to Israel, he added. They are intended to support regional deterrence efforts and further bolster our force protection capabilities.
Trial of Bankman-Fried cryptocurrency case nears the trial of cryptocurrency most infamous entrepreneur nears its end, with closing arguments set to begin on Wednesday. Sam Bankman-Fried, the founder of the now bankrupt cryptocurrency exchange FTX, stepped down from the witness stand in Manhattan Federal Court shortly before noon on Tuesday as his cross-examination ended. During his testimony on Tuesday, prosecutors pressed him on how Alameda Research, the sister hedge, dollars of customer funds On 7th November last year, Bankman-Fried tweeted and deleted, "FTX has enough to cover all clients' holdings," though he admitted a Signal chat that he knew there would still be an $8 billion shortfall even if FTX liquidated his assets. Prosecutors showed with child's records. Bankman-Fried's defense attorney rested their case after the government's questioning ended, and prosecutors declined to call rebuttal witnesses. Closing arguments are set to begin on Wednesday. On Monday, the prosecution had grilled Bankman-Fried of his public persona, asking if his unkempt boy genius look was a facade to woo investors and customers on his many media appearances. He balked at the questions, replying multiple times with "don't recall." Assistant U.S. Attorney Danielle C. Sassoon often answered his remark with quotes from interviews and emails illustrating that he did, in fact, recall an event. On Tuesday, his defense sought to explain the apparent lapses in memory. In redirect, Bankman-Fried said he had spoken up to 50 journalists in the wake of FTX's demise. Bankman-Fried's testimony began 3 days earlier with an evidentiary hearing on